Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
What does the happy, merry departure of the German Empire U-boat named the Deutschland from the harbor of New York City in 1916 tell us about the next 10 to 20 years of stock market returns and economic decisions in the world? I'm going to tell you on this episode of Making Sense. My name's Emil Kalinowski, and I am broadcasting to you live from the studios of Radio Cayman on your radio dial at 89.9 in Grand Cayman and 93.9 in Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. Of course, more importantly, perhaps it's the future, which we'll be talking about. And the future means that I'm also broadcasting to you by Photon. Yes, on the YouTube page, the YouTube channel, Cayman Radio Cayman's YouTube channel. Please go there. Leave it open all day long. We have a wonderful series of shows for you today. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you've been following the financial newspapers lately, but there has been a remarkable change in the relationship between business, private enterprise, and the government. And I am going to argue today that that change is permanent, and we can expect it, permanent as far as 10 to 20 years goes these days. So that's good enough. And we're going to use that example, that story about that U-boat in 1916. What should we do, ladies and gentlemen? Should we talk about the U-boat first or go through the news? The news is no interest. That's not interesting. Everyone can look up the news. Let's talk about this U-boat. Take yourself back to 1916, 2 years into the Great War between different belligerents, but in our particular case, the British Empire and the German Empire. Now, what do you need during a war? You need money, men, material, and that's what we're going to focus on right here, material. You see, the production of nickel that the Germans desperately needed for their war machines was produced in Canada. Now, Canada, being a part of the British Empire, obviously is not going to be selling it to the Germans. But Canada is mining the nickel in Canada and then sending it down to the United States for refinement. So the nickel is mined, and it's ore, it's sand, it's not metal really. So it's metallic sand. You send it down to the United States where it's smelted and refined, and out come beautiful sheets of nickel. Now, the United States is a neutral country in 1916. And so the German U-boat, the Deutschland, sails into New York Harbor, purchases 300,000 pounds of nickel, and then merrily sails back to Germany for the armament of its war machine so that it can shoot British soldiers, British men, with their own oar. Instead of sitting there and enjoying a nice cup of Yorkshire tea, they have to face missiles, bombs, nickel-plated armor that was made in the very British Empire. Ironic? No. It's much worse. It was outrageous. And the British Empire was appalled and outraged, and so were the Canadians. And so the Canadian government told the American business in a neutral country, the American business, they told them, you will move your refinery to Canada, and we will control who you will be selling to. Can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who have grew up during the laissez-faire 1980s where businesses did as they pleased, whereas when governments let things to take course on their own in the economy without interfering, this is outrageous. But of course, that was a time of war, a time of confrontation, conflict, and the American company moved, ladies and gentlemen. And that same story is being repeated over and over every single month, maybe even every single week, every single day. I have stories today of that story being repeated. Let's start in June in America, June 2025 now, not 1916. June 2025, the American government allows Japan to purchase U.S. steel as long as there is a quote-unquote golden share that America controls. One share that gives them golden total control. You can do whatever you want unless we don't like it. Can you imagine? It continues. In July, Apple was told to commit $500 million to a U.S. rare earths mine. Apple, the technology company, is now in mining because the Trump administration told them to. The Trump administration in August told NVIDIA and AMD, microchip companies, that they are, I guess, welcome to sell microchips to China, but they have to pay 15% of their revenue to Washington, D.C.? The companies agreed to this. Just like that American company in 1916 agreed to move to Canada. This one is a great story. The United States told South Korean microchip companies, Samsung and Hynix, Hynix, that they are not allowed to ship their goods to China and manufacture them there. The United States has nothing to do with this. It's a South Korean company manufacturing in China and then out of nowhere, and then selling it to whoever they want to. And then here comes this third party, this third country saying, no, you don't. This continues on and on. Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that Intel has fabrication plants in the United States which are hoping to be built, hoping to be advanced, but they don't have enough customers? Who cares, you say? That's their business. Maybe if they hadn't spent more money on repurchasing their own shares instead of on research and development, maybe they wouldn't be in this position. But the United States steps in and takes a stake in Intel. A stake. They're now a shareholder. And what do they tell their allies, other private businesses around the world? You need to support Intel. Why? Because we need these plants to be built in the United States. We need Intel to have customers. Why? Because if Intel doesn't build those advanced microchip factories in the United States, the world's microchip eggs will be in one basket. And that basket is called Taiwan. And that basket is 100 miles or so off the coast of China. That's what the United States is worried about. That's what we're leading towards. The United States told SoftBank, which is the majority owner of the United Kingdom's microchip champion, ARM, they told SoftBank to take a $2 billion stake in Intel. Now, SoftBank denies this. I'm just saying it's a coincidence. Let's just chalk it up to there's going to be a lot of coincidences. NVIDIA takes a $5 billion stake in Intel. The financial media said, wow, this is very surprising. After all, Intel is NVIDIA's arch rival. Isn't that peculiar? Again, they said, we've been discussing this for over a year. It has nothing to do with Trump. It's a coincidence that this movement is taking place. Intel then turned around and said, we need more money. They went to Apple and NVIDIA for more money. Did you know that General Motors was asked to invest in a lithium mine and contribute more money to it? General Motors is investing in a lithium mine. Apple is investing in a rare earths mine. The United States is telling different companies around the world who they can ship to and who they're going to be financing and investing in. You know who this bothers is, of course, our favorite kind of person, the hedge fund manager. I know. We're all crying tears for the hedge fund, the American hedge fund manager. But let us take a quote from Mr. Ken Griffin, the very well-known, if you're in financial circles, founder of the Citadel hedge fund, which has done, reportedly, amazing work. Well, here's a quote from him just this week. Okay, maybe it was last week. It's very recent. Quote, the line outside the White House of every business arguing why they should be exempt from paying tariffs on what they import into their products is nauseating. Quote, it's the government's engagement in picking winners and losers. The core competency won't be that you can drive innovation. It's that you can drive the right favors from D.C. We should tread carefully on that water. In fact, we should stay out of it. That's where crocodiles live. Ladies and gentlemen, my personal philosophical beliefs are in alignment with Mr. Griffin there. But they can't hold true in every circumstance. In some circumstances, ladies and gentlemen, the rules must change, or we must change and behave differently. We don't behave the same way in winter as we do in summer, do we? And right now, this global socioeconomic order is going through winter. And that's exactly what the keeper of the Library of Mistakes, Mr. Russell Napier, yes, there is such a thing as a Library of Mistakes. And it's exactly what you think it is. It is a collection of books about human folly, mostly to do with finance and business. Anyways, here is a very interesting man, and he's been opining on financial matters, and he, too, agrees with Mr. Griffin that, quote, something important has to be afoot to drive such major ideological adjustments regarding the relationship between the state and private sector in the U.S. Because, after all, you remember, there's that saying, the business of America is business, private enterprise, laissez-faire. And he tells us exactly what I have been trying to drive through for the last 15 minutes. Quote, that something important is the perceived growing threat to the United States from China. Everything will be done with that idea in mind. He continues, ladies and gentlemen, he is an economic historian, the Library of Mistakes. He's seen this over and over, and the following quote is a little bit chilling. Please slow down or keep your attention on the road. This one is a little bit troubling. Quote, perhaps not since the signing of the Treaty of Non-Aggression by Ribbentrop and Molotov in August 1939 have two great powers sought to ramp up domestic investment and military realignment so rapidly in preparedness for what both now consider to be an inevitable conflict. Whether hot or cold, only time will tell. Each of those industries that I mentioned to you earlier, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to pick this up after the break here in about a minute or so. Each of those industries that I mentioned earlier are battleground industries. We're not talking about fast food here. The United States and other governments, by the way, which we'll talk about, is not involving themselves in soft drinks. Microchips, materials, steel, rare earths, media, telecommunications. These are battleground industries necessary for the economic and national security of the United States and Germany and the United Kingdom and Japan, which will provide examples in the after this break about what's happening there and what we can expect in the coming 10 to 20 years. After the break.
Radio Cayman, maintaining the innovation.
On a daily basis, making it easy to connect with you, our listeners. Add us to WhatsApp today, 925-3261. That's 925-3261.
Radio Cayman.
Send a text or voice note.
Message us at 925-3261 on WhatsApp today and get active with Radio Cayman.
Radio Cayman, the voice of the Cayman Islands.
Radio Cayman, maintaining the innovation.
This is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's Emil Kalinowski, and I am talking to you about the fundamental change in the relationship between government and private enterprise that has taken place without a doubt this year from the United States, and that will continue for the next 10 to 20 years. Now, I know what you're thinking, ladies and gentlemen. All those examples that I listed in the previous half of the show, that was mostly from America and mostly from Trump. And Donald Trump is very orange, you're saying. Psh, he's going to be very orange, and then he's going to be out in a couple of years, 3 years or so, let us say, and then it'll go back to the way it always was. No, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, this is winter during the socioeconomic and geopolitical seasons of the world. And during winter, the rules change and don't apply. We could see Donald Trump come back for another term, perhaps as vice president. Even if he doesn't, he has a really impressive stable of political allies. He even has very impressive Democrats in his administration. Tulsi Gabbard, I forgot his name, Robert F. Kennedy. They're already in his administration, the most well-known Democrats, perhaps. So, ladies and gentlemen, he may not be gone. The people around him may continue his policies. They likely will. And it's not just America, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go to Germany. Did you know that Germany this year announced that they are changing their constitution? Yes, the Germans. Nothing ever changes. Everything's always on time there. The debt break in March 2025, they said, will no longer apply to defense spending. They are free and clear to spend as much money as they want on defense, irrespective of how deep into debt they go. And by June, they said they were going to issue 378 billion euros over the next 4 years, equal to 3.5% of GDP. That's what they want to reach, 3.5% of GDP per year in defense spending. They didn't stop there. That very same month, the chancellor said they're going to spend 500 billion on infrastructure, rail, roads, waterways. Berlin will be directing those investments over a 12-year plan. 1 month later, the Made for Germany Alliance, which kind of sounds like Make America Great Again, but Made for Germany, I can hear an echo. Well, this alliance pledged 631 billion euros in 3 years. Now, where's that money coming from? German companies. Just like those companies you're reading about in America. German companies promised to spend 631 billion euros, directed by Berlin, protected by Berlin, in Germany, for Germany, to make Germany great again. The head of Deutsche Bank, the CEO, says, quote, now is the time for government and business to pull in the same direction. Quote, we need to combine public and private resources as effectively as possible. The CEO of Siemens, the German conglomerate, quote, government and business must forge a new kind of partnership and take joint responsibility for society. In Britain, a little bit behind Germany and the United States, but it's happening as well, especially on the financial side, where, perhaps most famously, Chancellor Reeves, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, or as in She's the Money, as Vesper Lind once said in what was the very first James Bond movie that came out right now? Royal Casino, Monte Carlo. Oh gosh, how embarrassing. Quick, call in and give me the answer. I can't believe it. It's very embarrassing. I even have the book and I read it. And it was a lot of fun. It was the very first book. Okay, moving on. So, Rachel Reeves, She's the Money, and she told the UK pension funds that she doesn't particularly like that only 20% of UK private pensions, private money, is being spent in Britain. She said that in May. She said that's not going to last, that they are now going to be turning that around and spending it in Britain, and they're going to bring their money home. Ladies and gentlemen, if you play by the rules that we all learned in Economics 101 during this era, during the autumn of the geopolitical socioeconomic seasons that we were in, the laissez-faire era that began with Thatcher and Reagan in 1979, well, that's not going to work anymore because Asia's not playing that way. China's not playing that way. And Russia's not playing that way. They're directing their investments to ensure they have the necessary manufacturing capacity, industrial capacity to meet the challenges, quote unquote, that they now believe are going to be inevitable. Now, just a moment ago, I said since 1979 that we've been living under this laissez-faire system. What kind of system existed before that? Well, from 1929 through 1979, there was another French word, dirigisme, or dirigiste. French people can call it and correct my pronunciation. And that was economic planning and control by the state. And we are simply returning back to that sort of era, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just the United States, not just Germany, it's not just Britain, it's Canada as well. 1 year ago, the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry was speaking to a collection of miners. And in his opening statement, he said that I think critical minerals perhaps will be seen in the 21st century what oil was in the 20th century. And then here is the part that you need to hear, ladies and gentlemen. He said, I can tell you, when I started my role as your Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry, our dealings were mainly with the Commerce Department of the United States. That makes complete sense. Who else would they be with? Quote, today, most of my dealings is with the U.S. National Security Council. The United States, over the last 3 years, since 2022, has directed $26.3 billion in project financing for critical minerals. Other Western nations have directed $26.5 billion. That's money that used to come from the private sector. Now it's coming from the government. It's coming at a discounted rate. The government doesn't care about internal rates of return, but it's coming with strings. It's coming with strings and directions. And just like that American nickel company at the beginning of the last century, the world will have to fall in line because of the overwhelming political power of the United States, of China, of Russia, of these governments telling these companies that they are preparing for a confrontation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've mentioned some numbers there. Over the last 3 years, $26.3 billion from the United States alone in metals and mining. And then, of course, you heard about what I talked about with microchips. I would say it's on par, some of the monies that have been spent this year, and how other Western nations have spent $26.5 billion on metals and mining. We're going to use that just as a proxy, just to get a sense of the amount of money that has been spent. Now, ladies and gentlemen, coming up in November, the CFA Society will be hosting their annual investment forum, and the headline speaker will be Neil Howe, which I hope, if fortune favors me and the planets align, the stars align, I will be interviewing him in one of the episodes coming up very soon. Now, why do you care? Because Neil Howe believes in cycles, in socioeconomic, geopolitical cycles. And he predicted decades ago, that we would be going through exactly what the world is going through right now, the end of globalization, the confrontation, low confidence in institutions, revolution, populists, radicals, outsiders coming to the power. A whole new global order was being reset. And he predicted this, ladies and gentlemen, because he is a student of history. And he has noted that we have been through this many times before. If you remember in the movie The Edge of Tomorrow, Private William Cage said to everybody, you have to listen to me. I know what I'm going to say to you is crazy. But you see, this isn't the first time. And because it's not the first time, ladies and gentlemen, we have a plan. We have a schedule. We know what is going to come next. We know the scale of the investments and government involvement is going to only increase. How do I know that? Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Neil Howe will tell us at the Investment Forum in November, and maybe on these radio waves, this is the 7th geopolitical socioeconomic reset in Anglo-American history in the last 450 years. I believe this to be the 7th deglobalization since 1800. I believe it to be the 3rd worldwide global economic depression of the last 150 years. Meaning we have, let me do the math, 6, 12, 14 examples to go back in time and examine what happened at this stage of the process and what can we expect in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, what we can expect in the future is incredible involvement by the government in private enterprise especially having to do with battleground industries. Just to give you a gist of what you can expect. For example, ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. critical mineral stockpile right now is worth $1 billion. At the height of the Cold War, it was worth $42 billion. So 42x increase. The U.S. National Defense stockpile today is 6 depots of minerals used for war that the Deutschland needed in 1916. During the Cold War, it was 102 depots, meaning 17 times more. U.S. industrial capacity today as a proportion of the world is only 16%. At the end of the World War II, it was 15%, meaning expect 3x improvement, growth by the United States. Today, China, that same figure, industrial capacity, is at 30%, double the United States. The United States needs to double their capacity. The United States budget for 2026 allocated enough money to upgrade 30 M1 Abrams tanks. Russia produces 1,500 a year, 50x. China's shipbuilding capacity versus the United States, depending how you measure it, is between 230 and 480 times more. That's just to give you the sense, as we head into winter, socioeconomic, geopolitical winter, 2 great superpowers are preparing for confrontation. Whether hot or cold, we will find out. 2 of them are already in confrontation, Russia and the United States, indirectly, but they're already in confrontation. That's another great example, ladies and gentlemen. Did you know that the United States is producing 40,000 shells, artillery shells, a month, while Russia is producing 300,000? 7x increase is expected. So, we're only in the early foothills of this Cold War. We're only in the early foothills of government involvement in the economy on national and economic security matters. Expect monopolies, expect the leaders in these various industries to do very well over the next 10 to 20 years because they will have a Leviathan, a political Leviathan as a partner. Ladies and gentlemen, I've run out of time. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I will likely speak to you in a fortnight.
Good morning. Studio time now by Foster's is 8 o'clock.
When you're on the go, the experienced team at Foster's Farm